Right, I make it 8:30, unless anyone disagrees, so I will start there. Thank you everyone for dialing in this morning. This is the first in a series of 12 seminars. I'll go into that in just a moment. My name is Jack Southon. I'm Associate Director for Capita. I'm very pleased to be joined on this series by Ian and Katie from Thames Water, who will be helping me and will be alternating presentation duties. All the seminars series will be recorded and hopefully will be made available on the CIWEM website, and we'll post directions to that in the next event. I'm going to come off this slide because I'm already starting into my welcome. Let me just check. There we go. Hopefully you'll see a small little picture of me in the corner, but most of your attention should hopefully be on the slides that we're going to take you through. We've got this session. The idea of the scheme, I'll go through the introduction. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and the other presenters, about the branch and group, and also then just really outline this scheme that we're trying to deliver. So I've been working in supporting people through working towards their chartership since 2014. That's around then when I achieved chartership with CIWEM, and one of the key themes of that is your commitment to CIWEM, and I've shown part of that in sort of supporting other ones and promoting people in their membership. I was past chair of the Southeastern branch, and I'm very pleased to be a member of the Southeastern branch and the Metropolitan branch today. So Katie and Ian, who are also sharing the presentation duties with me, are members of the Metropolitan branch, and that's how we've got together to present this series. They'll give you a little bit more about their backgrounds, hopefully, in subsequent weeks when they're leading the presentations. We're on a rotating agenda. So you won't just hear me for the next 12 weeks. Thankfully, you've got some more interesting people to talk to. A little bit about the branch then. So the Metropolitan branch, who are hosting it, we focus on the sort of Metropolitan Greater London area, but we also, recognise that this is a need across, well, internationally really, to support people who are experienced in their careers, but just need a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of support to achieve their chartership. So we're very pleased to host this. But keep an eye out for your local branch events as well. And when things start to turn to normal, do look them up and think about being a part of it, because it's makes some fantastic individuals and get some great collaboration. Focusing on the scheme then, as I say, it's a series of 12 seminars. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but the real mission statement for it is to encourage more experienced graduate members and colleagues, even if you're not a member of any member of CIWEM at the moment, to pursue your chartership membership. So to really put yourself out there and go forward for it. I know a lot of people in their careers have prioritised project delivery or their project work, and often the prospect of sitting down and working through your chartership application can be intimidating, can be daunting. So what we've tried to do with this scheme is really break it up into sort of bite-sized elements so that it's more achievable. What the scheme is, so it's a voluntary scheme. Ian, Katie, myself, everyone involved is volunteering their time for this, and that's how we've been able to make these seminars free to access. It's run by the branch, hosted by the branch is probably the correct parlance at the moment, and we're trying to offer encouragement and support for everyone. And looking, as I say, those experienced colleagues who are seeking chartership, if you're approaching that point. If you're early in your career and you're just just a recent graduate, or there are other types of membership for you, and I'm pleased to direct you to the membership team for those. Hopefully this will give you a glimpse at what we're looking for in terms of chartership going forward and help you target your personal development over the long term. But it's really trying to pry out those ideas for people who are looking at the competencies and thinking, I'm not quite sure how that one applies to me. So we're trying to support them there. It's about equipping applicants with knowledge and confidence. So as I say, helping people understand how they can demonstrate the competence from their career experience. We're focusing on the application process and particularly competencies, and hoping to build a support network of peers who are in a similar position to you. So whether you're in a large organisation where you've got a lot of people doing this, or more commonly, if you're in a small organisation, you feel like you might be the only person at that point in their career who's pursuing their chartership. You might have people that have done it in the past or people that do it in the future, but you might be the only one going for it this year. And hopefully we can bring some of those smaller organisations together, and you'll find like-minded people who are in a similar position. Well, it's not a guarantee to membership after completing the scheme of the program. It's obviously no one would offer that to you. You do have to put the effort in to bring your own ideas to the table, and that's where we sort of the caveat is some self-assembly required. In that we will give you inspiration, we'll give you a framework to work through, but you do have to do a little bit of the work yourself, obviously, because it is your chartered application. I should also say at this point that there is fantastic. Thank you. I've just got a message through saying I can hear you well, which is very reassuring. I should also to highlight this point that there is the CIWEM Learning and Development Scheme, which is the Fasttracked membership. They're currently reworking that at the moment. This is separate from what we're doing at the moment. We're focusing on the competencies, and they're looking how they can dovetail the Fasttracked membership scheme into the resources that we provide, so that if anyone needs a bit more support in sort of taking it to the next step, needs linking up with a mentor specifically, or wants reviews and feedback on what they're producing as a result of the work we're doing here, then that's where that would move into that. So this our scheme completely voluntary all the time. The Fasttracked membership, more details will come out from that, but that'll be a more tailored, more supportive service, because as volunteers, and we've got 101 people on the call at the moment. So if you all sent us your applications to review, we'd be absolutely swamped. So just sort of trying to differentiate between what we can do, what we can't do. That then comes into the word of caution. So we did some logistics challenges in supporting everyone dialed in individually. So the Fasttracked membership team are looking at that. We're working with CIWEM HQ, sort of the main team, and there are very exciting things coming forward in terms of mentor database and the Fasttrack scheme. We're running this one until July, I think, is for the next 12 weeks. And then the submission date after that is August. So there's a great possibility that you could all, by that point, have your applications ready. And if you all submit at that point, that would be a fantastic challenge for the membership team to deal with. We'd love to see that happen. They might not support that statement, but hopefully there'll be a natural progression from there. So moving quickly on, it's a 12-week program. We do have a need for you to sign up individually each week in advance. So if you've found us this week, that's fantastic. You've gone onto the CIWEM events page, you've added this event to your cart, and then you've been sent that special link. So the next events will be going onto that events page, but and they should all be up there soon. So once you log in, you just go add. But you will not automatically be sent next week's link without opting into that event for GDPR and link management, safety management, security, ITC security issues. As I say, the aim of the webinars, I've already covered that, so I'll move on quite quickly. We are hoping to sort of set up a forum to foster a community spirit. We've talked with Barbara, one of our contacts, yesterday about the right place to host this. The functionality exists. We're just trying to make sure it's not too buried on our branch page and be a more appropriate forum. But hopefully that will allow you to interact with each other a bit more for people who are working through this. I'll quickly move on to the content soon, and you won't have as much sort of preamble next few weeks. It's just this first week's introduction. So here we are, April 22nd. We're looking at A1. We're going to work through them in alphabetical order as traditional. We are not going to look at competencies D1 and E2. So these are your commitment to CIWEM and your ability to communicate in English. The reason for that is because they are quite personal. The ability to communicate in English is often demonstrated through your quality of your submission, and you can keep that one quite brief in terms of any other reports and published papers that you published. Your commitment to CIWEM is very personal, and I could tell you what I wrote for that, but I'd be hesitant for everyone to copy that and then not fulfill it. So have a think about those two, and we're not planning on covering those, but the other more technical ones, we've got those for you. We're not having specific sessions on chartered engineer, chartered environmentalist, or chartered scientist, although we will flag at the end of each week where there are very similar competencies and where the common ground is, and hopefully you'll be able to use the main sessions to support those, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. If you've got any feedback on that, we'd be very much welcome. So what we need from you, I think this is my last preamble slide is just to opt in to next week's and subsequent week's webinars, so book those events for you. Engage with activities. You'll really only get as much out of this series as you put into it. So do the activities each week. Try and keep it. They're very. Hopefully you'll see they're very sort of bite-sized snowball aspects, and that's really going to accumulate over the next 12 weeks to give you a really solid foundation. Once the forum is available, do have a look at that. Try and join in with that, and follow it through. But don't give up after the first week if you find it a bit daunting. If something comes up, do dial in next week and the subsequent weeks, and just keep going. Make it part of your routine. The reason we launched it now is just to recognise that people have a bit more time. They're not perhaps doing that commute, so we thought you could use that commute time to do this. And feedback is always welcome. We've run this series of events. I've run it internally, we've run it externally with other support from the Environment Institute of Black and Beach as well in the past. So we're always trying to improve the resources. Katie and Ian have given some really great feedback, and we've been able to tailor the examples a little bit more this time as well, to bring in some more water industry, not just environment and sort of flooding, which is more my background. So any feedback you can offer going through would be very welcome. Finally, onto the format. So when we're going through the sessions and subsequent future weeks, we'll focus more quickly on this, and you won't have that sort of 10-minute preamble. We're going to introduce the competency, set out some key questions for you to ask yourself, and start to frame your answer. Give you some examples, and then set you some activities to do today, some quick fire activities, and then some activities for you to do over this coming week. And then finally, we're just going to touch on those cross-referencing for chartered engineer, chartered environmentalist, and chartered scientist, so you can see where the crossover is. So without further ado, A1. So A1 is knowledge of wider environmental issues and trends. It's a really great place to start in terms of the competencies. It's not the easiest one. I often start with a CPD competence because that's you don't have to put a lot of brain engagement in that one, but it is probably one of the nicest ones to write up. What A1 is asking you to look at is your knowledge and your wider knowledge, particularly around the area of work that you do. So you will have a role, and you'll have some very specific knowledge about that. But we're looking for A1 for you guys to demonstrate your knowledge around those aspects, so the things that you're working adjacent to, and how your work interacts with those. But then also potentially even wider than that, so wider sector knowledge, wider environment and water issues. The key things we're going to look through in this competency are, it has to be knowledge. We're looking at wider environmental, and we're looking for issues and trends. So I'm just going to highlight those keywords in the competency now, and then we're going to keep coming back to those. Just working through the key questions then. So the theme of the competencies, you should be able to demonstrate that you have a breadth of environmental knowledge and awareness. So as I say, is that encompassing wider aspects and not just that very specific niche knowledge that you've got. And you've an awareness of developments and future issues in your sector. So we're looking forwards, and you should be able to demonstrate a relevant understanding and trends in perhaps legislation, local, national, international directives, financial and societal drivers in your industry. So there's a lot in that point. So breaking that down further, the key questions for you for this week are: do you understand what the main issues and environmental drivers in your industry or area of interest are? We're going to go look at that, some examples of that. Do you understand wider context for the position, for your position in the environmental sector and relationship to wider environmental issues? So how does your role relate to other aspects and other requirements? What knowledge do you require for your day-to-day role? And then we can contrast that with sort of what other knowledge have you acquired, and where do you find environmental information you require? I should say at this point, so this competency is about demonstrating your knowledge. There is another competency, which is, again, this is a CPD competency, which I think is E or D two, which is about how you maintain your knowledge, but we're focusing on what knowledge you have at the moment. There's a little bit of crossover. So this is, again, a few key questions just to help you form up your answer and start to pull your ideas. Is, do you read or have an interest outside of your discipline, and how do you keep up to date on such topics? what environmental legislation drives the business of your employer, your clients, or your company. How do your employer or clients develop their business to meet the challenges and opportunities presented by evolving technology and environmental challenges? And can you explain, have a personal view on international or national current environmental issues outside of your core work area? That last was a really great example of how we can address this competency. So I'm now going to walk through some examples. I've structured this into sort of 3 different themes. So we've got policy, monitoring, and I think issues is the 3rd one. So this first couple of examples are looking at how people could address this competency by looking at emerging and changing policy that they've experienced in their career. So the first example is actually my example going back quite a bit now, which was I keep abreast of key policy and social changes affecting my work and wider sector, and try to link these to my projects wherever possible. For example, my knowledge and understanding of the Flood and Water Management Act has greatly supported the work I do on local flood risk management plans. The Water Framework Directive has influenced my understanding of the analysis I undertake on the effects of removal of in-channel features. So I've highlighted 2 pieces of legislation there that have come out during my career that were relevant at the time of my application. They're still very relevant, but they're not quite as recent. And how I've used those to inform project work. So I've not only demonstrated my understanding of them, but by showing that, linking that to a project that I've done, for instance, is shown that I can deliver on them. Taking a slightly different approach then, so again, thinking rather than working in the flood sector, if we're working in the water industry, you could think about how the Water Industry Act or the regulation by Ofwat and how that influences the work you do. You talk about the Drinking Water Inspectorate and also environmental agency requirements. So having a wider understanding of how the work you do fits into those policy-driven positions. One of the really interesting things that I've been learning about in the last 12 months is the Ofwat price review. I come from quite, as I said, an environment and flooding background. I've not worked a lot with water companies in the past, so to understand more about the price review and the implications of that, and also water resource management plans has been really interesting, and I can see how there's a lot of opportunities for people to demonstrate their wider understanding of that context and how it impacts on their work. Now we're looking at monitoring. So this is just, again, not to take away from the CPD competency, but to think about how you identify trends and issues. So part of this competency is keeping up to date. So it's great having a base knowledge, and you might have acquired that through a degree or formal learning, or you may have acquired that through sort of vocational training on the job. But really, with part-time competencies, is about maintaining that and looking towards the future and those emerging trends. So these 4 examples here talk about how you've continued to watch out and look out for future prospects that could influence you. So I won't go through these all in the same detail, but looking at the first one, I maintain my knowledge of wider environmental issues and trends through continuous professional development. I frequently make use of webinar and evening seminars events to allow me to maximise the range and breadth of my knowledge and access events that cover wider themes outside my immediate working area, including ecology, transport, infrastructure, sewage treatment, operations, engineering, while minimising the impact of these activities. So this person, what I really like about this competency is they've repeated some of the words of the competency in their response, which I think is always great exam practice there. So they've already taken on the words environmental issues, wider environmental issues and trends, and then they've said how they deliver on that. They've also put a little footnote in there about minimising the environmental impact of these activities, so looking at webinars, looking at minimising impacts, which also gives a sort of implicit understanding about carbon, energy, as well, which is great to highlight that very, very subtle subtext there as well. Looking through the others then, so highlighting membership of other organisations. So if you are fortunate enough to be a member or chartered with another institution, you can highlight that to say, actually, I'm multifaceted. I'm professionally qualified in another area, which demonstrates your wider environmental knowledge. You could talk briefly about some training courses where they've given that, giving some specific examples, or perhaps look at where you gain other insights. So Here we've got a less structured answer, which says I'm fortunate enough to have access to a range of environmental publications and journals. It goes on to list a few, and that sort of allows this individual to support knowledge and understanding skills with independent reading. So not all CPD has to be, and not all experience has to be through training courses. It can be on the job, you know, where your career has taken you, but also through your wider independent reading. My final slide on examples then is looking at trends. So these three I think are really key ones, and hopefully this will give a lot of people inspiration. We're going to look at climate change, we're going to look at emerging technologies, and we're going to look at the impact of energy. So I would challenge anyone to say, if you're struggling to identify the trends in your sector, climate change, emerging technology, and the role of energy are prime ground to think about how they affect your role and what's changed or what's changing in the way you deliver. So looking at the first example, the main issue in my sector, or you could say one of the main issues in my sector, is climate change and the resulting in intense periods of rainfall during the winter and dry summers. This will lead to greater risk of flooding and water scarcity in the water-stressed areas, particularly south of England. So there's that, you know, very, very succinct statement as identifying climate change as a massive trend, let's call it that, issue in the sector, which is driving a lot of change, and having a wider understanding of the impacts of that will really influence how things go forward. The second example then is looking at technology, so the role of emerging technology. So improved data is now available via sort of things like real-time loggers, or you could have more powerful computers, better simulations, better monitoring to collect accurate information, smart leakage monitoring, and satellite drone leakage detection to help targeting leakage. So that's a fantastic example where these new technologies have come along, have been tested, trialed, and are being adapted and adopted. So think about what technologies have disrupted your sector and how you've kept abreast of technologies that are coming through in your sector, in other sectors, and perhaps what a real prime example of this is identifying the role of perhaps drones or UAVs or some other technology, and how that can influence what you're doing. If it's exploited somewhere else and you can then adapt it to your sector, to your specific job, then that's a great example as well. But again, it's your knowledge that we're trying to show here. And then finally, this is another fantastic water industry example, looking at energy. So as energy use raises up the agenda and also links the climate change and carbon emission discussions, this example is looking at how the water industry is addressing and mitigating to reduce energy from fossil fuels, also looking at generating their own energy through biogas and other methods, looking at energy efficiency such as pump efficiency and network optimization, and adaptation to address items such as water resource management plans to address future needs, and building resilience in the water and wastewater network. So again, it's looking at, as I say, think about the role of energy, how you have adapted your role to deal with that, and your understanding of that. I can see there's a sort of a couple of things going on in the Q&A, so we're going to come back to that at the end. I should have said, just going to run through the material and then look to take questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone. Sorry, my kids are kicking off again. So activity for today. Talk with your peers if you got some colleagues at work, even if they're chartered or early career. Think about these sorts of questions. I'm going to show these questions at the end just so you get a chance to jot them down. The recordings will be made available at some point, hopefully. We'll be able to get them up this week. So things to discuss with your peers and on the forum once set up are, what are the main issues environmental drivers in your industry? So just think about that. Name three of the key main issues environmental drivers in your industry. How does the work you do relate to other disciplines or areas? So think about the work, your role, and how that is allied to other fields, and then you can often will pick up understanding and knowledge about those other fields through that. What knowledge do you require for your day-to-day role, and where do you go to obtain this knowledge? So thinking about, again, just specifically your role, but how do you keep abreast of the knowledge that you require for that, and how have you shown how you've grown in that over time? How does the work you do take into consideration and respond to environmental trends? So we talked about climate change, we talked about energy, we talked about emerging technologies. There's probably some others there that you could name that are specific to you, but those three I think are really, as I say, excellent topics that I would challenge anyone to say weren't impacted by them. And how has your employer or clients developed their business to meet the challenges and opportunities presented by evolving technology and environmental change? So how have you responded to those? And that's often a good way to think about how you then kept up to speed with those, how you forecast that change and how you delivered on it. We'll talk about A2 next week, which is more about the action. So this is A1 is very much about your awareness. So this week then, spend 15 minutes, you had a little chat hopefully at some point today with someone about those key questions. So just spend 15 minutes answering the questions, writing them down, prepare 5 bullet points that evidence your knowledge of wider environmental issues and trends, using that structure that we've provided through the key questions, and using some examples today perhaps to spark inspiration in what you're doing. We've got some tips here just about when you're preparing those bullet points or when you're working through this, and also preparing your competencies in the long term. We always want you to write in the first person. So for the chartered application, we're only really interested in what you've done and not what your team's done, not what your company's done. Often, you all have be working as part of a wider project. So try and identify your role within the project and your contribution. Sometimes, emerging technology is adopted by your company or your clients, and then that's your adaptation to them and your research and understanding around those, which is your contribution to it. But you didn't, you may not have sourced and introduced it yourself, but you've upskilled yourself in to understand about it and adapted it and borrowed it from another field. So we really want you to be honest about your contribution and not talk about the work of others, or specifically don't talk about applications that say we did this or my team or my company. It's all about the I in chartered application. Another key aspect is understand why you're doing a particular task and what's the bigger picture. So thinking about your role within the project. Be concise and keep it clean. You've got a word limit to work to, so keep your answers concise. Remember what you've written. So this is more about after you submitted. Excellent, good questions in the Q&A, and I'm running out of time, so I'll go through this a little bit quicker. And don't limit yourself to experience gained within your current employer or paid employment. So if you've moved jobs, you can absolutely go back to previous examples. And if you do any voluntary work, you can pick up on that. So very briefly then, just looking at those cross-references, we've got for the chartered environmentalists, you've got the A1, which is very much about knowledge again, environmental trends, engineering, theoretical knowledge and understanding, and emerging technologies, and C1, general knowledge and looking at emerging technologies. So they're very similar. I'm going to pop back onto the questions whilst we go through the Q&A. Let me just find that if the other panelists want to unmute, if they've got anything. So the first question we've got, will there be a session covering the interview process in the future? So we've not got one planned at the moment as part of this series, but I know that's something that the Fasttracked 2 membership team, our learning and development team, are looking to do, and we've given them some ideas about how they could perhaps hold mock sessions around that, look to see what's coming forward in that space.
Yeah, we were thinking as well with the current lots of things being done over webinar, it might be really useful if you could dial in and tap into a mentor or a sponsor to help you, support you with that mock interview process in advance of the interview itself. So we are going to be looking to hopefully set something like that up over the coming weeks and months.
The question about CPD records, yeah, we'll absolutely be covering that. It'll be, I'm kicking myself not checking this, either D1 or E2 is the CPD, and so that'll be part of that discussion. So you have to wait to the end, unfortunately, but we will come on to that. Someone's got a question saying, I've recently moved sector from wastewater to flood risk management. Would you say I need to get a few years before I can do the application or talk about our sector? So part of the sort of one of the key points to the feedback there was, it's not just your current job. If you've got, that's a really good example of A1 where you've got knowledge from 2 sectors. You may have changed role, and actually having a knowledge of wastewater process is really going to help your understanding of flood risk, because there's a lot of interaction between, particularly in urban drainage, and there's a lot of material that you can talk about there. So having knowledge from multiple sectors is absolutely fantastic, and you don't have to worry about not having that. What I would say is if you only did a couple of years in wastewater and then now you've moved into flood risk, and you may still have, you might not be in a more senior role. Some of the other competencies where you are, which rely on almost on sort of delivery. If you're not delivering at that more experienced and accomplished level, due to a sector move, you might challenge those. But A1, you should be out. There should be a real strength for you. And that's sort of an individual basis. I'd say that to judge. Thank you for organising. Brilliant, lovely. So can you copy and paste? So this is when I did my application. This is my weakness in me. So when I did my application, you did one set of competencies, and they got assessed for everything that you opted in for. I now know you do separate applications for each. I would say you're submitting separate sets of competencies for Chartered Water Environmental Manager and say Chartered Engineer or Chartered Scientist. You could use similar examples, but just make sure you tailor them to the wording of those competencies. They're very similar. If you use the right framework that we've provided here, you should be able to have very similar answers. The examples were of varying lengths. Could you give some guidance on length of A1 competency? So if you take the average, the word count you've got, divide that down by your 14 competencies, that gives you a very basic understanding of what your sort of allocation is, but you can vary that. I would suggest some of them are easier to demonstrate with fewer words. Things like the ability to communicate in English should be, in my opinion, quite a short competency. Some of the others where it's more about how you, they've got multiple points to how you monitor, respond, and how you respond, monitor, and adapt. Things like that. Some of the C's, some of the B's, they sometimes take a few more words. So I would try and keep this one a little bit on the shorter side, but look at your average word count, see how you get on, and then adapt that over time.
I think on average I was around 300 words for the more meatier ones. Yeah. So just as a point.
What else did I thought there was another one that disappeared, but fantastic. So I think there was a question about passwords. So there will be different passwords, unfortunately. So as I say, do go to the CIWEM events page. All the events should be listed there shortly if they're not already, and just make sure you do opt in for next week's event, and you'll get the email hopefully the day before, if that's what you've done today. I think we very kindly sent out some more emails this morning, but do sign up for session 2, and you will get an email and connection details. If you submitted before and received comments on competencies, would you updating only the ones raised or submitting all? So my understanding of this, and the membership team would be better able to respond to that, is that if you've submitted all your competencies, they're looking at them against a prescribed level. So you may have understanding of an issue, you may be able to demonstrate some delivery, and then what we're really looking for is competence. So it's your ability to do that independently and deliver on that. If you've delivered on that competence for a competency, say your wider environmental knowledge, you've smashed that one, you've developed that, I would say that's achieved. You're obviously welcome to update that with how you've moved forward, but really focus on those ones where you've just been found that you've not been able to demonstrate that level of delivery. So I would definitely focus on the ones which you've got feedback for. Okay.
Just on that, yeah, I'd take the opportunity to try and update all your competencies. You know, you've got an opportunity to do it again, so you might have had another 6 months, a year. You've got new experience, so
yeah,
try and update everything.
I think the other thing to say is that obviously your competencies come with you to your professional review. So if you're more comfortable talking about recent projects, you feel they're stronger examples, then you could segue to those. Equally, you know, if you've passed that bar, you could always give additional examples. You don't just have to talk about your competencies in your professional review, and you could talk about new things. But it's a good idea to map the projects that you're doing against those anyway. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our session then. We were originally, I think, 8:30 till 9, and I'm sure you've all got busy things. So the A2 webinar is not currently available. It should, hopefully we'll get that up there today. And I know the connection details are already set up. Apologies, we have been testing my kids' patience, but also CIWEM HQ's ability to post all these events for us. But that will be up there shortly, and just do keep an eye out. You know, if you follow us on LinkedIn, we'll obviously just highlight when that link's available to book but do look through the CIWEM website. So we'll wrap up there. Next week, smaller introduction, and hopefully go straight into A2. I can't remember if it's Katie or Ian next.
Yeah, it's me presenting next week.
Fantastic.
So.
And we're looking at A2, which is not just your environmental knowledge that we build onto here, but how you then respond to that. But I won't steal any of Katie's thunder there. Thank you for everyone. Do spread the message if you found it useful. Do share the booking links, not the log-on links, the link to CIWEM events page with others, so they can also benefit from this. No, thank you very much for dialing in, and we'll bring it to a close there. Thank you.